Good morning. I'm Rabbi Julie Danan from Seaside Jewish Community in Rehoboth Beach. Living near the beaches, I love nautical stories, but you don't have to be a sailor or to be Jewish to appreciate these teachings that come from the story of a rescue at sea many decades ago. On the day before Rosh Hashanah 1943, Rabbi Marcus Melchior stood before his congregation in Copenhagen's magnificent Great Synagogue. It was the holiest time of year, but instead of preparing his people for prayer, he warned them to flee. Through a chain of messages, beginning with the courage of George Ferdinand Duckwitz, a German diplomat stationed in Denmark, Rabbi Melchior had learned that the Nazis were planning to round up the Jews of Denmark on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. So he instructed everyone to go home, gather their families, notify their friends, and not be home for the holiday when these unscheduled so-called guests would be arriving. The 46-year-old rabbi, his wife and 5 children would be taken in by a pastor, Hans Kildeby, a Lutheran minister at a church in Oslo, some 60 miles away, and they had only met once, but this pastor was willing to risk his own life and safety to take them in. Word spread quickly through whispered phone calls and quiet visits. That night and the next day, Jews across Denmark just disappeared. Some were sheltered by old friends, some were hidden by strangers, and in the coming days, thousands would be ferried on boats across the Øresund Sound to neutral Sweden. When the Nazis came, they were not at home. Now, I grew up hearing this story, and as a child, I pictured a dramatic midnight flotilla with dozens of boats making their way across the strait under the moonlight. But this summer, I got to visit Denmark, and I learned that the reality was far messier, more frightening, and more human than my childhood imagination. At the Jewish Museum in Copenhagen, I watched a film narrated by Rabbi Melchior's son, Bent, who himself later became chief rabbi of Denmark, and he described their escape when he was a boy of 10. Their family was crammed into the dark, smelly fish hold of a small shipping boat. For 7 nauseating hours, they were tossed about on the choppy sea. At dawn, they were relieved to see a lighthouse and land until they realized the sun was rising from the wrong direction. The inexperienced captain had lost his bearings, and they were back on the Danish coast. Well, the fishermen turned the boat around, and at last they reached Sweden, where the first sight was a small boy playing on the beach. He spotted the exhausted refugees, ran to get his parents, and the family welcomed these total strangers into their home for the duration of the war. The boy and the rabbi's son became lifelong friends. But even in Sweden, life as a refugee was difficult, at least though they were alive. While 2/3 of European Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, 99% of Denmark's nearly 8,000 Jews survived, and most returned to their own homes after the war. It was not a flawless rescue. It was not a single heroic act. It was a messy, improvised, and sometimes desperate effort. It depended on the Swedish government, some of the Germans looking the other way, donations from the wealthy, and the bravery of the Danish resistance. And yet it worked, because countless Danes, neighbors, pastors, fishermen, chose to help. They each brought their small boat, their courage, their willingness, and together they formed what I like to call an armada of goodness. And Denmark in 1943 was not the only time that people have formed an impromptu fleet in a moment of crisis. Back on September 11, 2001, when Lower Manhattan was sealed off after the terror attacks and hundreds of thousands of people were stranded, the Coast Guard put out a call for boats. And within minutes, an impromptu armada of ferries, tugboats, pleasure craft, police launches, and private fishing boats converged on the harbor. And for 9 hours, they evacuated 500,000 people to safety. This boat lift demonstrated the extraordinary heroism and selfless actions of everyday citizens. And then during Hurricane Harvey 2017, when Houston was flooded, the so-called Cajun Navy, an all-volunteer armada of private boat owners, drove in from Louisiana and beyond, rescuing more than 4,500 people and delivering vital supplies. They saw their neighbors in danger, and they stepped forward. The Danes and the Swedes in 1943, the boat captains on 9/11, the Cajun Navy. These are all examples of people who stepped up and did their part in a crisis far beyond their making and even endangered themselves for the greater cause of preserving life. These days, we often talk about our tough or even unprecedented times in which we live, but consider those times and the people who did their part in even more perilous circumstances. Each of them had good reason to think of themselves and save themselves, but they chose to show up for others. Well, today, it's not just one crisis. We all know we're living in a time of many crises, a storm that threatens to capsize our society, it sometimes feels, when we see the effects of climate change, political violence, political polarization, refugees and their plights, the rise of racism or anti-Semitism and hatred. We could just feel overwhelmed and paralyzed and hopeless, wondering, how can one person really make any difference? Do my little actions matter in a world with such big problems? Well, my own tradition answers this with clarity, and I'm sure yours does too. One of our ancient sages, Rabbi Tarfon, said, "It is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it." And also the sage Hillel taught, "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And when I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" The call is not to save the whole world. The call is to bring our own boat, whatever its size, into the fleet. And if not now, when? And I've seen this happen time and time again. People in my own community, and I'm sure many people you know, have experienced some difficulty or seen something in the world that needs action, and they've taken their own action in their own communities, whether it is to increase tolerance, to bring peace, to reduce violence, to help the underprivileged and vulnerable. I can give you many examples that my short time this morning doesn't allow. But think about yourself. What can you do? What can I do? We can each imagine that we are captaining a different metaphorical vessel, large or small, luxurious or simple. Your boat, real or metaphorical, may seem small, but it matters. In Denmark, that rescue depended on every kind of boat, from fishing vessels to small skiffs. And on 9/11, there were ferries and tugboats working side by side with little kayaks. On Houston, there were canoes and swamp boats. Thus, each of us, everyone and individually, and all of us united together, can make a difference locally, can make a difference in the world. So I encourage you, find others and feel your joint energy and dedication, what I like to call an armada of goodness in the world. The storms are real and the seas are rough, but history shows us that even in the darkest times, when individuals bring their own small craft and join together, they can form an armada of goodness strong enough to change history. And with that, I'd like to sign off and to say I hope you have a wonderful day and find some inspiration. This has been Rabbi Julie Hilton Danan from Seaside Jewish Community, Rehoboth Beach.